The diagnostic chapters for this unit are the substance-related and addictive disorders and the disruptive, impulse control, and conduct disorders. I always thought it was arbitrary that a distinction was made between substance abuse and substance dependence. It seems to me substance-related issues are best thought of on a continuum, and that is what we find in DSM-5. The substance-related disorders encompass 9 separate classes of drugs, seen here. These 9 classes are not fully distinct. All drugs that are taken in excess have in common direct activation of the brain reward system, which is involved in the reinforcement of behaviors and the production of memories. They produce such an intense activation of the reward system that normal activities may be neglected. Instead of achieving reward system activation through adaptive behaviors, drugs of abuse directly activate the reward pathways. The pharmacological mechanisms by which each class of drugs produces reward are different, but the drugs typically activate the system and produce feelings of pleasure, often referred to as a high. Furthermore, individuals with lower levels of self-control, which may reflect impairments of brain inhibitory mechanisms, may be particularly predisposed to develop substance use disorders, suggesting that the roots of substance use disorders for some persons can be seen in behaviors long before the onset of actual substance use itself. The substance-related disorders are divided into 2 groups: substance use disorders and substance-induced disorders. The following conditions may be classified as substance-induced: intoxication, withdrawal, and other substance medication-induced mental disorders, psychotic disorders, bipolar and related disorders, depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, obsessive-compulsive and related disorders, sleep disorders, sexual dysfunctions, delirium, and neurocognitive disorders. In addition to the substance-related disorders, this chapter also includes gambling disorder, reflecting evidence that gambling behaviors activate reward systems similar to those activated by drugs of abuse, and produce some behavioral symptoms that appear comparable to those produced by the substance use disorders. Other excessive behavioral patterns, such as internet gaming, have also been described, but the research on these other behavioral syndromes is less clear. Thus, groups of repetitive behaviors, which some term behavioral addictions, with such subcategories as sex addiction, exercise addiction, or shopping addiction, are not included because at this time there is insufficient peer-reviewed evidence to establish the diagnostic criteria and course descriptions needed to identify these behaviors as mental disorders. In ICD-10, gambling is coded in the Disorders of Adult Personality and Behavior section as one of the habit and impulse disorders. In DSM-5, most of the substance-related disorders are differentiated by type and by severity. Disruptive, impulse control, and conduct disorders include conditions involving problems in the self-control of emotions and behaviors. While other disorders in DSM-5 may also involve problems in emotional and/or behavioral regulation, the disorders in this chapter are unique in that these problems are manifested in behaviors that violate the rights of others, such as aggression, destruction of property, etc., and/or that bring the individual into significant conflict with societal norms or authority figures. The underlying causes of the problem in the self-control of emotions and behaviors can vary greatly across the disorders in this chapter and among individuals within a given diagnostic category. Although all the disorders in the chapter involve problems in both behavioral and emotional regulation, the source of variation among the disorders is relative emphasis on problems in the 2 types of self-control. For example, the criteria for conduct disorder focus largely on poorly controlled behaviors that violate the rights of others or that violate major societal norms. Many of the behavioral symptoms, such as aggression, can be a result of poorly controlled emotions, such as anger. At the other extreme, the criteria for intermittent explosive disorder focus largely on such poorly controlled emotion, outbursts of anger that are disproportionate to the interpersonal or other provocation or to other psychosocial stressors. Intermediate in impact to these two disorders is oppositional defiant disorder, in which the criteria are more evenly distributed between emotions, such as anger and irritation, and behaviors, such as argumentativeness and defiance. If a client obtains a score of 1 or greater on items 21, 22, or 23 on the Level 1 measure, further clinical inquiry is required. If this score is obtained on item 23, the Level 2 substance use measure can be used as a part of this inquiry. It inquires about frequency of use of 10 different substances over the past 2 weeks. The Level 2 measure for anger is triggered by a score of 2 or greater on item 3 of the Level 1 measure, which asks about feeling more irritated, grouchy, or angry than usual. It is a 5-item version from the PROMIS group of measures. The 5 items are rated from 1 to 5 regarding frequency during the past 7 days. A score of 16 to 20 indicates moderate severity, and 21 to 25 is labeled severe anger. The numbering system for this chapter in DSM-5 carries over the distinction between abuse and dependence, which makes it very confusing. In contrast, the ICD-10 system of numbering is straightforward. The numbers before the decimal point designate the substance. In ICD-10, the number after the decimal point records more specificity regarding the severity of the disorder. For each of the 7 levels of severity, a variety of subtypes is defined. Remember that the F90 section of ICD-10 is the behavioral and emotional disorders with onset usually in childhood or adolescence, and the F60 section is the disorders of adult personality and behavior section.